Welcome to the Sandra Worthington Silver tutorial. I'm Brian Klarman. The participants are Coppell on the affirmative, and the negative is from Montgomery Bell Academy. I don't actually know anyone's name. That's what I got.
Is anybody not ready? Good. Good. Cool. We're in the midst of the race war. 21st century wave of xenophobia and racialized white nationalist hate has set the order of modernity that re-embodied the inheritance in 1619 benefits. Actually correct. Commercial cells and foreign military cells to arms are forged in internal debate over the expansion of white humanity and all its hypocrisy. The global promise of white being determines the coordinates of an always unfolding violence in humanity. It's all its hypocrisy. The global promise is already steeped in the edifice of accessibility. Narratives of racial progress ignore the pre-established template for progress that's inextricably tied to white humanity. Reforms are encapsulated when the order fluctuating between waves and retreats in which white supremacy is the backdrop. The establishment of statecrafts, the theater of racial nation building with facilitating movements and sometimes post-civil rights and multiculturalism research and white nationalism, post-racial liberalism, law and order, the war on drugs, war on terror, infrastructure, tolerance, and repression. They're never finally separable. The race war is inseparable from logistics, a code of modernity that may move the sociopolitic demands, the era of the code sanctioned killing of black and brown bodies. Modern logistics is commercial logistics. The first global movement in commodities required algorithmic regulation, arrangement of bodies and movements so as to secure the financialization that we witness today in arms sales policy. The code sutures itself a new kind of war, calling upon the perversive nature of policy as a means of sanitized touch harney. At OIT, modern logistics, commercial logistics, even today's military logistics, the most commonly outsourced to commercial firms who make huge profits at the logistics, contemporary permanent war, the Atlantic Century, it's the birth of modern logistics, and new kind of war on human species and of racial capitalism. This trade until the first global movement of vast commodities, finance, the logistics entwined with today's global shipping industry. The story of the song is central. Modern logistics is about sociopathetic demand, more topographical jurisdiction, bodily and social access. Modern logistics is about controlling the flow of ensuring the flow as much about the interference and movement of commodities and finance, transition, elimination of goods and cargo. When the price falls, for considerations of finance in the song, the slave was worker of the line, and at the same, the supply coming off the line and into the line are untaken, but requires them to make the interbc mere contingency. Logistics will always be on white science, the science of being white. The race war is not just out there, but in here. Debate is a microcosm of the race war. This so-called neutrality of fairness, predictability, stasis, clash, topic, education are ideological means of entry in which the protocols are not a negotiation of competing models, but predetermined by logistics of white being that seeks to fix those that need to be fixed. Limits are not just limits on the topic of practices of the community. Clashes is debate the refusal to invite certain teams to round robins, policing and falling around black and brown debaters because their arguments are unsafe. Black debaters getting the cops called on them because their music is too loud. All prove the uniqueness question of the race war and the inseparability of the internal debate from debate as activity. White logistics in the race war have encroached upon the linguistic commons to the point where even thoughts themselves are quantifiable and financialized, wired on the psychic drive of anti-blackness. The mode of governance is internalized and replicated as violent practices of the race war, but as ubiquitous as the system sounds, is always vulnerable to the system glitch. Neural firings that are never supposed to happen, a movement that cannot be expropriated. Beller and 17, the cognitive linguistic have undergone colonial preparations. This overlaps with the violation of the society trade. These encroachments, the linguistic comments with the level of technical saturation percent though political has been lost. What can political media in a world characterized by algorithmic governance and platform sovereignty? The expropriation of the cognitive linguistic by capital reduces discourse production to the machine inequality sentiments of machines, operationalize injustice to produce and reproduce the planetary culture founded upon a race of machines must be understood as racial formation. Sociality is posited, then programmed as a series of accumulation strategies operating through everyday consciousness. There never in a quantifiable, computable, and programmable. However, it's a mistake to imagine the impact of technology flows only in one direction. Technical form, emergent dialects of domination struggle from the ways that they press outflank domination, persistent living, racialization, part and parcel of corporal inscription. The code works us and we work the code. This is how a build level, micro level show struggle organization. There's no existing political discourse can approach horizon. Current concepts and thoughts themselves are fully circumscribed by ideas themselves have become operators fully functioned by and in the mixture of information work that transforms and colonizes neural, mental, sensual, and neuronal process while submitting them to internal regimes. This finite attention to everyday life. Everyone is forced to dictate throughput information in order to manage totality and source. We are dealing with the overcoding of bodies and practices, the absorption of political entry by strategy, accumulation, politics, and policy are today always on the side of the state and the state side of capital. Pull up the king card. The adjudication of this internal debate is no different than the logistical enforcement as arms sales policy is a corrective, but in this blur is the possibility of a horizon, one that problematizes the need for policy, one that is misimagined and disimagined, an echo that asks the question, what would happen if the fleeting moment of anti-state terror were socialized against its den concurrence? Thus, we affirm military preservation as a reduction of direct commercial sales and foreign military sales of arms from the United States. As Beller reminds us, it's a mistake to imagine logistics flows in only one direction. Military preservation is the unsettling feeling of the opposite flow, one that begins at the moment of sociopoiesis that harnesses the energy of sociality against the perversive fixation of policy, refuses the violent corrective and violent touch of white being in favor of a new feeling, a haptic relationality where we open ourselves to the possibility of possibilities, one where we gather dispossessed feelings in common as we undercommon the capacity to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel them feeling you. This is the field of insurgency, a field that refuses to be regulated under the jurisdictional doctrines of DCS and FMS that dictate the race war and its practices. It is the fugitive feeling of endurance felt by those that hold in the hold of the horror of the first logistical cell. It is the rematch of the institutionality by South Asian pouty states who gathered and wandered, the refuge within each becoming ungovernable. This is the sapping of individuation that happens via forceful imposition of arms sales policy without understanding plus this corrective in debate. It is the incompleteness of our apolitical projects that inclines us towards one another. This is the apositionality being together yet against the very institutions that seek political and logistical control. Melbourne and 16 a performative event repeated with each reading can be a rupture. Institutionality works to undo and estrange their logic individuals and their will to fix their sociality itself is resistance policy. Is the name for the form of political control, and command takes deputized districts to form a command which controls social reproduction by diagnosing incorrectness for those who represent the need to improve it, but in Hardy counterpose planning policy we have against with military preservation to escape the procedures of the polity mode in Hardy. Often supposed to persist the statement there's nothing wrong with us. Logistics counters bodies, objects, affects, information to logistics Hardy and mode counterpose have to counter your love, the capacity to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel them feeling you. Sociopolitical imagination as a term for the non-place of abolition beneath and beyond the university, inhabited by maroons, castaways, and fugitives, and a positionality being together that renews our sense of institutions, a site where the form of reappearance of social being and collectivity is determined through social action and contest. Institutionality can be made anti-intuitively that empowers to try to inhabit social being, otherwise reminding us that radical change requires structure. What does it mean to be militant? Shakaitis and Graeber tell us it is the imminent process of resistance, one that is a source for social insurgency among the people who refuse to be passive victims of or willing participants in an oppressive system. The requirement that in the midst of the race war and logistics we have no choice but to analyze, strategize, and act on their surrounding social conditions. Movements are not just abstractions or overlaying circuit points on the global sphere, but ongoing resistance that happen in our thoughts, action, provocations, and explorations. Our moral debate seeks to extend towards new levels of understanding the imminent process of resistance that unleash beautiful insurgencies from the ground up. This is work without a beginning, without an end, and a constant planning as opposed to a policy we take with us wherever we go. Shakaitis and Graeber 7 investigation, social research, expand possibilities of political action. The work of militant investigation, multiple extended attacks with two levels of understanding. Militant investigation discovered new possibility within the present, turning dead ends into joyful uncertainty. Holloway helped compile a book of essays on Zapatista when we write or when we read its beginning is not the work of the screen-faced mutilation of people like the radical reflections, opposition, negatively struggle from rage thought, and born liberatory struggles, ultimately struggle against identity, true religious knowledge would not have to private form of knowledge that laid bare to all pretentious, deeply embedded the logic of transracial practices, fierce debates in Latin America, arguments turned against around very particular question of revolutionary strategy, who has better model Zapatista or Chavez, a Bolivarian revolution, the role of the ballot to abolish the white debate committee, white space are contradictions seeking to organize without dispersing what they own. Harney and 17 our enemies have been saved not by fashion but by democracy, meaningful cross-racial vindicating found modes of revolution by not for passive, some for self-defense, audio where black speaks that someone is indicating now she or he wants to join down common struggles, but struggles of black and white communities and contradiction. The only thing you can do is abolish a community against anti-communities, undercommon people who present as white are not allies. They have no place which to show this unless they embrace blackness. Whiteness to see the absence of violence, and white people have a big role to play in revolutionary violence. Non-black academics must take seriously the way their desires interact with black scholarship. That's King. And 19, when I'm controlled with yet another white project on black people's bodies, specifically Crooked, I'm now compelled to ask more questions. There is a generative potential to mining non-black scholars there in the midst of blackness. What is your body doing to respond to blackness? Labor that seeks to abolish anti-black rights, must study the non-black process the side of blackness is most radical. Scholarship faces its own desire for blackness. The anti-racist project sees the eradication of anti-black violence, which relinquish the posture of respectability due to boundaries far from altruistic or expression of allyship. Non-black scholars are invested by their studies black are within a recognition of the occurrence of the non-black individuals. The blackness non-black scholars are receptive to asking themselves the following question: how does studying black bodies make me feel? The empathetic disclosure interrupts the violence of politics of pure and anti-racist intent. The empathetic disclosure practice accountability does not naively assume that non-black scholars use blackness expression of allyship, but that it's a question of corporate universally, but it produces scholars with the primary interest in producing political action. The eradication of anti-black violence. A corporate university trains us to work with the inner best self. The question that non-black scholars must answer: how did I save black studies? Rarely are not white and non-black scholars asked to reflect on how black studies saved them. Non-black scholars should choose to open themselves to unraveling their investment in possessing themselves in black captive blood.
Are you good for cross-examination? You want the card? Just send it out.
Okay,
I'm good for cross if you are.
Yeah.
Okay, so you prescribed and described this race war. I'm a little confused about how the ballot and specifically this round functions as aligning yourself with different sides.
So two things. We think that it's not a question of picking sides, but strategies for the race war. We think that as of the 1AC, militant preservation is a good strategy for black and brown students to combat the race war.
Okay.
If you make topicality arguments, we will say that this debate is a question of repeating models of debate.
Okay.
We think that our model.
But reading framework does not position us as on the other side of the race war, does
Well, it depends. If you say that clash and fairness are good to preserve the game, and you say the game is a part and parcel of the race war, and you're just like, well, debatability outweighs, it would position you on the other side because subjugate black and brown people to not have the strategies they need right now to endure the violence that is.
I mean, fair enough, but you've said certainly that there are other strategies besides militant preservation that can be used to fight against race war. What's an example of one of those strategies?
I guess like pessimism? Like,
Okay. And-
what AF? Like,
Well, like
using what
the
negative
app,
strategies can be
the
made?
app doesn't say those are bad, do they?
Well, I guess, like, wait. That alternative strategies to combat the race
Yeah.
war, those debates are good.
Those debates are good, but obviously you prescribed one that you think is best, right?
And we think, yes, if
That is necessarily better than something like, as you gave, pessimism.
Well, we would
Right?
say that our
So-
strategy is better, but
well,
it's the role of
that begs
debates
the
to
question.
hash out the intricacies
Fair enough,
of
but
those
how is
debates.
framework not a disagreement about that strategy? The same way that you condemn pessimism
Well,
as less
framework-
solvent than the 1ACs.
Framework is an imposition that the AF has broken a rule of debate and that we should be rejected for the sole purpose that we are not following.
I don't know
the
about that.
procedures.
I mean, maybe
We're
like
gonna go for
maybe like
fairness,
1980s framework, but
I mean, games can be
so
like
what is the
fairness.
white debate community?
Well, we think it's not like a person or like a set of people, but
Sure.
practices. We would describe, like, as we said, fairness, predictability, all those things.
So
that
reading
ground-
framework inform in some extent what other practices define the white debate community.
Well, we've read like
We've
all
read
black,
examples of
yeah,
anti-black
it's like
practices.
non-black judges or all black judges getting struck from panels.
Yeah.
So
Policing
surveillance
that happens to black and brown bodies within debate
Calling
spaces for the
cops.
arguments they read.
all
Okay.
that stuff. We
So it seems at least that you've kind of oscillated between undercommons, communities of care, and an analytic of a race war. You defend all three of those things.
community. Where did we say communities of care?
So you're not going to defend communities of care.
Well, we think the AF creates a model of debate that allows for black and brown students to survive.
Okay,
So
so
undercommons isn't necessarily a place, but a mode of
Yeah,
relation.
for
Mode
sure.
of relationality.
The
Sure,
1AC
okay.
specifies kind of sociality. The
Okay.
undercommons is a fairly broad term.
And
that
I guess
depends on how you apply it. We've said
what
so-
is the undercommons relationship to kind of people prescribing rules and things like that?
So wait. But
Well,
what's
I don't
the
know if the
question?
1AC is sociality.
Yeah. So
Well,
we
sure,
said
sure.
sociality. Good.
But what is the undercommons relationship to like when somebody gets up and it's like you should follow the
Well,
rules?
we think that would be like we've read evidence about why coercive touch is bad, and we would think that that's a form of coercive touch that forces a project
Okay,
or something.
and-
we think that we should always be in debt to each other, not for a
Okay.
specific reason.
Well, you haven't
not for
really
a
answered my
specific
question.
purpose.
How does the like that is coercive touch? Sure, you've prescribed as that. What does the undercommons do about that
Well,
coercive
we
touch?
think that the Beller evidence says that the code is that anti-blackness shifted to the project
Yeah.
of the code.
I'm asking about what.
Well, yeah. So the tracing of that code creates blockages because we think that the code cannot understand sociality, cannot understand how we relate to each other, or any of the affectual arguments that we make.
What was even said? Two off case.
Give me a second. My Wi-Fi was like. I couldn't
Yeah, we got the one I see like a few minutes after.
Yeah.
Did y'all get the part though?
Sorry.
The king.
King, yeah.
Yeah.
Send it to people last night.
Can I get paper?
Does everyone have it?
I don't, but I think you can start out.
Are you sure? We can
Are you sure? Everyone.
Oh,
Y'all-
got it.
you're good? Okay, good. Interpretation and violation. The affirmative should have been the hypothetical implementation of a topical plan they don't resolve. Before Coleman first legislative form, Army Office School 05, the Coleman introduces a formal resolution after a result, Coleman this council petition the mayor. The USFG is the federal government, the USA based in DC, dictionary government policy, and the United States federal government based in Washington, DC. The text resolution calls for based on the hypothetical government election. Erickson 3, the external against kilometers in the United States, the version, the urgent action should adopt a policy. The entire debate was about whether something ought to occur. Releasing DCS and FMS requires governmental action. Sorensen, FMS involves government sales. It says themselves DCS coordinated through the State Department, FMS coordinated by the DS, CA. Vote neg first is prep and clash. Post facto topic change alters the balance of prep, which structurally favors the app because they speak last and use per key to engage with a adversary and a target of mutual contestation. Second is limit specific topics are key to reasonable accusations for two ends. Open subjects, creating incentives for avoidance and monopolization of the moral high ground that denies the role for the negative and turning accessibility. Third, continual change. Unlimited topics makes assessing the validity of the 1AC truth claim impossible and causes concessionary ground, which creates incentives for avoidance. Racialization is an exercise of power that can exist contingently. Changing it depends on interest group combination. Zach 16, the injustice can be interest in the ground. Understanding is not only the goal theory, opponent on concrete levels, the power relationship that whites are low to give up the shift to discourse from a rigid socialized into social construction dominant groups that regulate ideas based on their goals for dominance race. It's not dynamic, not preferring the call back, no matter how metaphorically about moving the new ideas right white voters space, so it's not predetermined characterizations or opportunistically stereotypical positions that may be unduly managed into view deliberate design. What is happening is a competition among interest groups that is in the insistence that there is practical alternatives that the forces begin to alter. The next step is to get the people elected change policy to build infrastructure local effects can be addressed on their local levels. The after performance of defeats radicalism and instead of strategic focus on gaining political power, the app develops themselves into exaggerating the importance of their project. Rito, one put Pearson in motion, ideological purification, many things to come to. Arcane debates, removing the issue, the rest, and discourse, and fitting social relations into one. Appreciate the narrative, the moral slave, the moral learned, and idiosyncratic rhetoric combined with the interpretation current events without resort to the of those who read extra events paper over the reality that this politics can wildly fit the meaning of most modern action. This politics can be rationalized, quite disprobable, and object association, anything can mean anything, can be specifically conditioned meaning without constrained by an external world. The essentializes black experience via ideological projection, which creates false consciousness. Read 18. The Black American publication conform to technical lenses ruled out instead blacks imagined as abject. This assumption continually subordinates history to imaginary narratives on the surface appear radical to report to a black point of view arise from the mythic black community. The qualification seems to be an inclination to legally intractability of historical racism, profoundly race reductionist, but disguising it lies as the racism intractable lies beyond the political intervention. Read Leaving only extradition to individual conversation programming unconcerned with the treaty Klarman, problem piecing together populist war to actually prevail the claims of the cultural ownership is because of deadly conflation of racial essentials, and we never recognize discern presumption that black person should be recognized as a significant racial truth. The premise is the essence of racism. Next up was the critique the absent investment in ethnic racialized identity leads to color checking and new standards of recognizable ethnicity according to the race war that turns the whole Afghan to be 14 the vehicle that returns the course of menaces more divided in a certain ways by ethnic minorities connect in order to present themselves and recognize the ethnic lead to enough black enough Asian enough that Americans as far as one has to look in the mirror ethnic identity adapted to the image reproducing identity that will often the poor man's mental one experience there or expression conform to the notion identify one's place in accordance to race be allowed to a place in the color line racial attribute mass provide coherence and integration to chaotic that signifies racial maps to use small categories of black and white language to organize the differences I was excluded with the symbolic and imaginary the race real dimension of race when ambiguously ethnic search fails their mission to mirror there is discomfort and anxiety to a given symbol Puerto Ricanness is more malleable how he flew based on expectation of what it means to be Latino Asian black and learns this power us further limiting political power by carving out minorities exposed to the conversation about statements difference which black sharing color checking narrows what it means to be black and for instance from experimenting with new forms of system emancipation and psychosocial role of the one they sees revolutionary politics leads to homogenization of difference as the role of the one they see comes to play and is the vanguard of revolutionary politics a form of petty sovereignty that legitimizes the university's multicultural homogenization tendencies as Viego in 7 the ethnic person the resemble was recognized as they were effectively objectified themselves in accordance with the RDC to authenticate familiar imagining of them as ethnic so resource functioning given to a march instead of what print wire disappears turn knowledge or disappear the privileged members of cultural minority who at this point roles contain the more radical deployment difference that might destabilize homogenous international cultures and privilege marginal cells and diversity manager of souls for universities celebration of multiculturalism diversity is not something that cocaine can be dispersed and do it safely the concern comes with the desire to save a university from any real transformation in the politics of knowledge production how might think for marginal craft more transgressive uses of its difference given that the course of system already work however we're left with the vicious dynamic that offers a pure beingness followed by a kind of discuss about the ethnic race all subject policy which are necessary strategies to destroy those alive specifically their analytic of a race war is bad and fixed identities around rubrics of antagonism movement and Levino 6 race war carbon discourse of the nationalist movements that become the discourse of a battle that will has to be waged between the race that holds the entitled to find the norm rather than so to deviate from the norm the Nazi days also being engaged in firms war the idea of race or warrants of race of the forms nationalism which particularly group relates to a certain set of values the void loss of national discourse to function the designation of enemy with the integrity of ideals the enemy which society is war with from which the society must be defended what in the Nazis and they figured the enemy of Foucault for short transformation for any state discourse due to nationalism we are seeing people and them in the their community fed by those who are different discourse race war positive violence and constant antagonism in the social because it's going to incorporate into the mechanism state and is directed towards society's enemies every time they say about the race war is happening that is the link and a double term with Moden 14 I see who the refusal standpoint is this without saying why would it be the thing I said desire for a standpoint black lives live with in the background of the subject why would they offer a radical solution for political order the consideration of a radical distinction between the socially and state section but the state must prepare power line their subjectivity to have honor to them a combatant transcendental subjectivities perpetual civil order refusing induction to enact and perform the recognition of the constitution society's enemy hostility and civil butchery the unspoken violence of political friendship with constitutional capacity for alignment and coalition understands society in the accordance of the transcendental aesthetic to be fundamentally and social nursery for political imitation of life social health is not imposed by the political rather is the field of political form which blackness relegates to supposedly end of math or the law of the social which is the case where and what blackness chooses to say the alternative is to unenlist true undercommons requires absolute vulnerability and unconditionality as opposed to the ass line drawing and embrace of antagonism this is what the one these authors actually advocate for Moden Hardy 13 academic question of the university the question they say the undercommons says no question asked and unconditional endorsements of refugee even though maybe London police stations and instruction the questions to revolution and undercommons to be critical of the university make one of the professors require excellence more and any other distance of oneself professionally through critique is not the most active because of privatizing the social individual the undercommons right might be contrasted by being understood as warrior critique warrior but that retreating into the external world academic and humanism will pursue the undercommons seeking to preserve the need to conserve the undercommons knows it is not level critical academic who this but if the other others from the undercommons the conclusion will come they're not practical not serious about change not rigorous not productive that critical and that makes it clearly critical of negligence this alignment type of trade is only negligence is critique it's negligence that defies the possibility of a thought of outside case Political hope is not intrinsic to being topical, disenchanted view of the law recognizes the law's futility while still using it as a rallying point for social organization and community empowerment. Harris, on 94, disenchanted jurisprudence for reconstruction focuses on the moment struggles to alleviate suffering. The disenchanted jurisprudence will not include the appearing legal answers of feudal counter-revolutionary, opening the agenda of the large political and economic context of the law, professing the serious against theory, building the serious disenchantment and rationalism might mean the expansion of what it means to be intellectual, to bring music, preaching as equal honorable, theorizing legal storytelling, making responsibilities for these expansion of empowerment is crucial in politics, difference, legal concepts of empowerment, creating a collective subject action through groups subordination. Individuals who are members can come to understand that they have the capacity to act in the capacity to act in the world. It's not a matter of choosing between empowerment and recognition. Racism permanent, and no matter what analogy is the one dream of a society free of racism. It is of both the recognition of futility of action and the unalterable conviction that something must be done. Morals alone can never break down the barrier between ourselves and those we set out to persuade. The app overemphasizes that micro-ethical project of self-creation must be tethered from the outset to advocacy for institutional change. They demolish collective political action. Myers 13 so far she has been this recognition change the macro level or avoids question of series of reflex action in the case of collective efforts avoid techniques and self-sequencing readiness activities primary secondary rather than mutually inspired. There's been a diagram chronological primacy too as goes for intervention. How is this intervention going to get off the ground at the is not there from the outset from the getting to public claims that an attention specific problem defined as changeable that is fostered by the macro political efforts of democratic actors for self-care must be connected to the large political mobilization tendency to be protest and self-care relationship allies difference between caring for oneself and for conditions but also celebrates the former as primary. Learning to see his powers through debating institutional dynamics is a more effective political strategy. Spends 15 and the moment all seems lost their ability to speak for our public goes to exist in the institution and population we have written because of how we believe they're incapable of radical political action. Black youth exists and Jackson is to be a black worth organized pressure metal and let's close the president back of my aggressive movement made electing who love to organize and see the usual state head on hold on serious and means designed to inform people of the way political officials are working to kill public education. The backless matter organize politics with the center of the struggle. Ferguson all use more language where they didn't rely on the circumstance standards of season power rather than speaking truth. The power to it power that they provide the alternatives with involve political struggle morality can make it hard to move against the charge school for one who seriously believes in power that goals represents the best hope we never should never know to find the roles politics plays and should play. Right, okay. Should play.
Good.
Yeah.
What do you think debate's relationship is to like the political?
The argument we're making on framework and case is that debate should be kind of a testing ground for us to refine arguments, to learn how to engage institutions, infiltrate them.
The majority of the 1NC or none of the 1NC contests that black and brown students experience violence within the Academy of Debate. Why is it good to imagine something external to us? And why does that create
we think that's
energy?
a false dichotomy.
Okay, then answer my question of why focusing out there creates social energy for black and brown
because
students.
they're so inextricably bound up, you can't really disconnect one from the other, i.e. the reasons that these things happen are material conditions on the outside that kind of spill into the inside.
How do you change those material conditions? Like, I understand
it's not like voting
cool.
neg in this round does it, but we've forwarded a model of both a model of debate and an impact turn to your model, which we've read on case, argues that institutional engagement
that
and
assumes
the skills
that
necessary to do
we
that
have
is
the
more
levers
effective.
of power to change those
Obviously as high schoolers, our agency is limited, yes, but we think debate in the long term, through a process of classroom education, creates the people who can.
So your argument is that like we experience violence now, but we should wait it out because
compare that to the act. Well, it's inevitable, so we should give up, which I think is the death knell of social energy. The Spence evidence gives examples of black and brown communities that were able to mobilize social energy around political demands, and this like cynical idea that we have no influence on
Spence
politics.
Evidence cites
not true.
Grassroots movements such as like Malcolm X's movement.
Yeah, the Jackson Mississippi movement.
Fiating, learning about like the state and imagining it does something teaches us when to organize, where to organize, how to organize, who to organize with, how.
We think that is we think the answer is yes. We think engaging how the state carries out something like a racist arms sales policy or racist zoning policies in the context of these institutional engagements does teach us how we can best advocate for a position against the state.
How? Like, how do you know
the state,
where to organize, when to organize,
these
who to
institutions have
organize
monopoly in the levers of power. We think that engaging with how they exercise that power is effective, and without that, political organization is kind of doomed from the start because it can't
the alternative
get off the ground.
To the critique, what do you think the undercommons is?
As Moan prescribes it, we think the undercommons is a spate of absolute vulnerability where the door swings open for refuge.
Okay. What part of the AF do you think closes the door?
Well, multiple parts of the AF. I mean, we can go through the links, but when I see Crossexamination, I guess the most clear example when you're like reading framework is a subjugation of strategy. It seems like pretty clear that you close the door on people who think framework is a good strategy. That's one link, but it's obviously a manifestation of your broader analytic that we think, the idea of a race war itself, we've impact turned. Right? And Moan completely disagrees with the idea of a race war. Well, think of Moan saying, like, I love black people, but I don't side with the black community. I.e., the idea that as soon as we start to draw lines around people, that is...
The 1AC Crossexamination, I was very clear, it's not about people, it's about practices. Well, so what do you think that...
you define people by their practices. Remember when you said the debate community is made up of people who do X, who call, like, the cops on black debaters. It's made up, and then you can... Then the 1AC sanctions the ability to justify those people and mark them.
It fixes identities. What about saying that there are bad people fixes identities?
Well, think about the analytic of a race war between two warring sides against which is a life or death struggle. We've impact turned that idea.
think that you're critical on the critics and stop that from happening, but sometimes it's still not fun. Like this part. There's like this evidence that the new evidence, it's like this one. There are identities that you don't really work with. Yeah, because that's it. Leads to those sorts of nationalism. So I think that your alternative does. It's not 622.
Judge me.
622, so.
Yep.
How do we not get it?
That'd be great.
It's gonna be K's. T. Undertones. Select number. Everyone good?
Vote affirmative for a politics of military preservation that traces the logistical code of DCSF method, revitalizes societies and neural blockage that stops the process of individuation to endure the ongoing race war. It's a mode of mutual indebtedness against white institutional violence, similar to the field of the whole of South Asian policies, but oriented as a blockage to the logistical system. That discussions of DCSFMS are framed with the uniqueness question makes the after the race war is here and happening now. Theodore F. Ferguson, extrajudicial claims anti-black debate practices like black debating the cops called them conscious to be the nature of our striking of black is the role of the to abolish the white debate community. Cross-racial affinity can only be found in humans in our mutual indebtedness to blackness as a mode in harmony of the first argument of political hope. One, the notion of disenfranchised pacified students, and we have a distance in design which is the king evidence that we read in the 1AC says that when we think of violence out there, notice how violence happens in intimate spaces like debate, and the notion of always thinking that, and the notion of learning topical debate is something that gets encoded within us, which is the logistics war, and will be later on forever given the micro bad arguments doesn't make any sense. That is not really responsive to the affirmative when you have a theory about how logistics operates at individual which that only beginning at the micro level can stop, or else the movements of their cards just get split, proven by how the BLM gets splintered by things like swatching started to put on them. The institution's good arguments are just are answered by first a couple different things. One is the whiteness is a normative ground of institutions that operates and surges and retreats. One is Rodriguez Index. There are other examples of progressive reforms because they're always circumvented, i.e. slavery, Jim Crow, and presidential public. Second is that we have a theory of logistics Beller. Since the violence has transitioned to the era of the code is still within our cognitive linguistic functions. Institutional reform reorients the code that explains the code. But the formation of that algorithm itself is based on expropriated communicative and racial violence because it relies on coherence against black and brown bodies. Third is that we reimagine institutions based on ungovernable sociality, i.e. party system, evidence. T. Debate is not a game but a microcosm of the race war. Their move to procedurals uphold the internal debate of why being that access is corrected to reinstantiate protocols put procedurals on hold of the race war because competitive protocols can't be divorced from the social motorization of debate itself. Form as content. When I see Bellage as a cognitive linguistic has been suffocated by an algorithmic mode of governance which necessitates the harvest of life proves the valid form because it shows us the neurological rewiring that reprograms everyday consciousness towards sociality, which is also a spill out beside counter inter was defending militant reading of the resolution. When I see Shakaitis defines this as anti-logistical social insurgency which forces affirmatives to defend militant strategies to fight the race war under which DCSFMS have been framed. We flip the scripts for functional limits to policy but planning preferred. One is militant skills. One is Shakaitis says the debates over resistance strategies are key for those living through the race war because only predictable debate is over the race war. Only our model allows for comparison of different resistance strategies like the Zapatistas versus BBP which generate social energy. Second, their vision of a predictable cease point is not a neutral negotiation but presumptive assumptions under the terms of the internal debate, i.e. the new demand for fiat even with a lack of resolutional basis. There's a couple of disasters to their model. First is a pacification decide. Their disavowal of the internal debate in favor of American polity as a frame for debate pacifies militancy as insurrection politics which gives into whiteness and its demands. Which side forces oppositionality, not apositionality, which is the white movement, describes as the only way to imagine military preservation. Second is an individuation, is that their focus on USFG should process our political politics as complete, which allows logistics to infiltrate and individuate our embodied affect and forces us to submit to coercive power. When we start with the presumption of violence out there, we don't understand violence in here, which is the only way to trace our psychic investments. Third is that the TVA is not competitive or responsive. It's what debate could look like, not what debate has to look like, which means that it doesn't resolve our offense, but only militant skills now. Fourth, their call for a success in a moment of crisis is the mood of equilibrium that maintains civil life in the race where you should refuse is the fairness arguments. It's just an internal, like if we want our research model is the best way to generate militant skills, then you would have any impact here. We went to their vision of the game where large applies to fairness, because the reason it matters is because it says the game there's no fairness in the race where the mood maximizes status quo in orders that keeps antagonists in some way that's worse than any level most comfortable for white people. Fair play rules apply to everyone. We produce concepts like fairness, harmony, routine, the race, accuracy, and how can we maintain the maximum order with the minimum amount of change while preserving single cells, conflict over wishes, and one was better process, motion that keeps antagonists in every black body that is low things you love, say, thirdly, and cheer fantasy, that's revolutions of way incorporating black race, students, determine the debate, unfairness, and simulated game is good. That's Warren. And 11, students have race with the structural forces will carry racial experience when students from a privileged background experience unfairness in the game can understand have some attitudes and behaviors with the effects of race and basic concepts fairness systems of the world is spread losing on around here game to cognitive dissonance. The idea testing arguments. First, I'll answer the first piece of evidence theory. The notion of radicalization is not necessarily, the notion of racialization is not social, but a byproduct of logistics, which means that only society is able to solve, which will be later answered on the critique. Second, the second evidence presumes that the app doesn't actually do anything and is kind of trapped within a system, but our counter-term is not insulated. We made arguments about microkey to kind of spill up the racialization essentialism argument is not correct. We made arguments about how we're incomplete and always incompleting on another, which is a massive link term that'll be later on the critique there. The exclusion turns that you choose arguments first that you exclude these strategies means they link to a wide echo chamber. Debate is a sign of ideological warfare that's helping in hindsight the academy regulars who can participate in dialogue and project of applicable stories and liberal parties of superficial inclusion, inclusion, dialogue, frequently look up to your lack of community, we should be shocked for something more racial. More article today, like the materiality, intellectual, and free discourse, service, flex, and necessities of politics and engagement. We reject the research of academic tradition, flex, and our psychology, so even when they're not formally obviously the table, when we enter into a debate, we are citing the black article tradition, dialogue, calculus comes out of high class conspiracy, real, since the part of the mark the card, at home, there's the policing decide that's powers, and 16, the ruling class loves debate. Debate is where future armed dealers are taught to engage in how judges do and how the power pretends that the normal running of things is fair when the attorneys say interesting things that high boys and about the being primary certain differentiating parties, we have to moral flexibility. These imaginary societies and we have hypothetical people from all customary conflicts, develop action real life without ever encountering persons, without ever encountering persons protected by school. Laws is law by law, being changed to argue anything as long as preserving the existing law is the definition of law by the state of moral flexibility of society teaches rhetorical blueprint that the ruling class will always win. No one will ever win. The debate is the entire principle of the debate is prevent and truly destructive from happening with the card. Disruptive defense, fiat destruction, topical policy, advantages like casual warming aren't intrinsic but repeated, which just presumes no predictability, reasonability for arbitrary inclusions to arbitrary exclusions, competing in trips or over limiting trips at the expense of ethics. The critique. This debate shouldn't be about which team can accurately explain how violent is manifest, but about which team can accurately challenge those formations. Debate is not a time to analyze systems or decide about to generate the revolutionary potential, which means that the critique can't fundamentally solve because they're not able to generate the society that's needed. And if they are, then it just proves the permutation do both, even if there are symbolic attachments to kind of notions of racialized identity. Resistance of material violence of whiteness precedes the symbolic because of the race war as a uniqueness question. The race war shapes and preempts both linguistic and material production of violence, which by ideas, being studies and memeticism, thus Rodriguez, and under former struggles taken for granted the domestic, binaural and black and indigenous subjection. The left is really disliked and envision the application of U.S. domestic warfare assumption. The left remains unwilling to understand rebel process mobilization and transformation on the concrete terms of domestic war. Domestic warfare becomes a common language and material production of the state as state of emergency and encompasses war. There's a massive link to the consumption of identities is subjective, but it's held hostage by logistics that is invested in a cognitive linguistic process of everything that only the African bloc, which answers the first evidence. Also no link to their color checking arguments. We haven't said that people are on sides based on if they are white or black, but we have isolated certain strategies that are exported as anti-black. Beller is just too good on this. It's not the race war that fixates identities, but logistics creates a condition for those identities to exist in the first place because it's a system requiring the harvest of racial and communicative violence, which is that A, all their impacts are non-unique and the all can't generate uniqueness, but B, only the affirmative can by sociality. It's not also a question of universal identities because Moden already said it's a question of being included. Their links are only to the status quo, i.e. the analytic of the race war, which is continued by logistics, but only sociality blocks. Is there alt evidence, the line right after they've highlighted, if you don't know why, proves that we should let anyone into their undercommon only when we do not know the political orientation. So either stopping David Duke from infiltrating the movement is bad, or the F has not said these things are impossible. We still think Ada should debate as whether he should engage in militant strategies, but he has engaged in anti-black practices. Prove that we have prescribed people on sides, but we have said that there's certain violent practices, permutation, debate, that's Moon, and Hardy 15, when we assemble, disassemble, and a new intent as our undercommon affectability, but we make access to the line. I don't need the end, we go every single part of our renewed assembly, the general disassembly, or disassembly offline and online, making all the wrong things because our doing and undoing, and this to move from an outcome, sabotage, disillusion, logical capitalism, to armies, to done access to capital, having such a fungible right to total value and bias. Everyone over there, the foundation of the world is a space on the personal level, just of sales, continuous improvement, access to personal value. We are all in the right to right to individuality. That's what one improves us. Who keep moving around the one who hold everybody back in the production line. That's the wisdom of all being including one another. There has to be past sketchy, there could unfriended, there in self-sufficient, in deciding completeness and inclines us towards one another. The more we think of ourselves finished whole and individual, the more we cannot be loved or below the self self-defense and uncommon. Love is the uncommon self-defense of being uncompletely in our defense. We love that we are complete only the pain and completion which they would have done, or we would they, but about that we do my working because we do my dying still. The arguments about being critical was already answered in the question of the alternative because it proves that there is no mutual exclusivity and we still and they want to see still that there's a level of incompleteness means that we should still be up and but their notions of reading framework are most definitely a double turn with this because the exclusion arguments prove that they also link into this and the alternative is just impact turning. The framework strategy militancy overcomes wounded detachment to blast objects and scapegoating this hook and 14 pretty melancholy necessarily involves hostility towards the alternative the fact of loathing self-objectification to one wants any good that can be worthless and open up to the fury of super ego transforming institutional quality into something more particularly motive personalization of the lost object melancholy is not a pathology but an mechanism that helps us reconstruct identity and take our debts to the various battles that we engage in their name. Our resistance is always already extralingual. That's Philip C. and 17. If we are engaging in war symbolically, the resistance needs to be unspoken and important. Wars just don't go. When Western culture sees that all of its values are extinguished, it turns on into itself. When a singularity throws its death into a ring, it escapes the slow extermination. This is a game of double, or puts a singularity decides to suicide the other. Mark the card other.
Did you send a card tag? There's a policing DA.
The 16 card.
Did I not?
I don't
I
think
don't have a card.
so. Could you send?
Yeah.
And what was the card that you marked?
The one I just marked was the Gillespie evidence.
Oh, sorry, on framework.
Mark Hawthorne and Heights at harm. It creates a real sense of harm.
Thank you.
I marked the policing one too, wherever you see two entries.
Oh, sorry, it's in the doc. It just wasn't. The tag function was not.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. All right, EK, you're good.
Give me a second. I'll get some water. Yeah.
First, I want to talk about your theory of logistics.
Sure.
The Beller card, to my understanding, talks about how white logistics overcodes and co-ops political speech. Why does that not happen to the affirmative or the spill-up results that it has?
Sure. Our argument is that the kind of, like you said, the cognitive linguistic process is overcoded by logistics, but if you kind of read the second part of the Beller evidence, it says that we work the code works us and we work the code. We have said, the logistics evidence quite literally says sociality is a blockage because logistics is not able to kind of
sociality
understand.
in what sense is a blockage to
Right, so like for example,
what's the bright line for better question, what's the bright line for like what kind of sociality blockades linguistics?
So I'll explain it. So like sort of institutional focus in which there's a telos to our projects is understood by the code because it has an end goal and that can be instrumentalized.
But why does the app not have an end goal?
Well, the app doesn't have an end goal. We've said that in the face of the race war, we should be indebted to each other and we should love each other.
Sure.
There's no end goal. There's no reason.
Sure. Why
there's
does
no
why does like a framework interpretation why is that presumed to have an end goal? What's the difference there?
Because everyone's like plan, reduce.
Well, I know, but the question there is opening up possibilities for organizing. Why does that necessarily have an end goal?
No, the advantage would be based on solvency of like the plan results.
Okay, but why is that required for a plan to do? You have to have this X end goal. I mean, if I feel like in that sense, everything has an end goal, including the app.
No, we said there is no end goal. Like, there's no reason why we do it.
Then why is that just as a framework? Like, why can't reading a plan involve multiple things that don't have an end goal?
We've also read a King piece of evidence that says that when we imagine institutions as out there, we forget that sometimes we are the institutions, sometimes we are the cops. It says that non-black academics should not.
No, it does answer your question because your argument is in the context of the individuation.
Topicality.
Yeah.
Why do you think psycho responses are responsive to this case?
The militancy argument, the hook evidence, says that things like militant preservation are kind of able to overcome the wounded attachments to identities that we have, which is the terminal impact.
Well, we didn't make an ego argument, though, like an unstable ego fortification argument.
Yeah, even if you didn't, the impact of the coercive mimeticism argument is a form of like kind of self-backlash with the identity, which we've argued that militant preservation overcomes.
T, counterinterpretation to militant reading the resolution.
Yeah.
What about people who don't want to militantly read the resolution? What happens to them under your model?
We think that they'd be forced to read a militant reading of the resolution.
Why should everyone have to read a specific militant strategy?
Well, we have why is that why like debating over these strategies is good because there's a race war.
Yeah, but like you've made arguments about like performing care in this space. Why is saying you have to read militant strategy not double term with that?
It's not double term.
We're forcing people to do something.
We've said that
that seems like an end goal as well. Why is that? How does that reconcile with the rest of the
things? A model of debate is not an end goal, but we've said
that
militant debates stop the process of individuation, which is key to social energy. We think that's good. Anyone who doesn't think so,
why is that key to social energy?
Well, we've said the process of individuation acts through a sort of logistics that says we are fighting for an end goal. We are not fighting for each other.
Okay, but
militant debates allow for individual actors to know their places in violence, which creates micro-political strategies that are good.
8 minutes. not very long, like 6 sentences. But
Space for like
Wait,
6 sentences.
things?
Space for like a few sentences.
I'm big. Are there cards?
is everyone really good?
Yeah.
Awesome.
The 1AC was an ideological double turn. Coppell preaches communities repair, haptic love, vulnerability, but at the same time drawing strict lines between us and them, forming binary state communities and relying on liberal ideas of antagonism. Our argument is by accepting the very premise of there being some intractable race war they've already surrendered and given into the very coordinates of whiteness. They came at you with the draft, the role of the judge and the ballast to refuse the terms of the race war, to throw up deuces and peace out of the limelight. They say they're not about explaining violence. We agree about most of this, i.e. that we should kind of organize ourselves around generating sociality and strategies. But one, where there's no clear binary in that the analytically used for prescribing violence necessarily feeds into what strategy we adopt outside this place. Second is that they can't go for sociality good because we agree our argument is the AF was antithetical to sociality. We've recut their evidence that concludes our way, but this helps our perm argument because if it is a question of comparing different models and different strategies, you shouldn't allow them to get the perm. The next argument is the perm. Reject it. One, it's ideological severance devoted for intellectual responsibility, effective strategy formation. Second, it bankrupts debate. This is the method debate, and you should set the AF and the egg on parallel tracks and compare them to maximize debate's pedagogical value, even if they could be combined in the real world. Two, implications. First, education perms rely on that assumption that we should make compromises and kind of allows the AF to spin off often. Second is education because the lack of a plan text means that competition debate transforms because they're an affirmation of the way they relate to politics rather than a political end goal. Third, it overcoats the resistance of the alt. Inclusion of the AF ensures the radicalness of the alt is channeled into a reactionary strategy that is measured against a rubric of whiteness. All the links are dishats. I'll do one here. First, it's a reactive racialization link. No matter how persuasive the two ARs or how pathos heavy it is, the cycles of violence they mandate and the way they desire to bring change about means that the AF strategy is simply not worth it, which means all of our alt can access the AF, but they can't access any of our strategy. Their strategy is one of, quote, refusal, quote, disruption, are far too reactive. They can subsidize politics vis-a-vis white logistics instead of a strategy that actively affirms energy. Their 1AC Chukatas and Graeber evidence cements this link. It says that, quote, the starting point of theoretical reflection is opposition, negativity, and that they, quote, start from negation and, quote, struggle against identity. Their speeches will never be powerful in terms of pathos, but voting affirmative would only be voting for a political methodology that organizes its practice along the coordinates of whiteness, which means that the playing field is mapped in advance. Ask yourself how militant preservation will make any sense if the white debate community didn't exist, which proves that their strategy kind of reifies and calcifies those structures because spaces of care only make sense if those spaces are already occurring on form and on face. The content of the 1AC seems like a fuck you to the whiteness of debate, but on the level of form, it colludes with the structures of power because its politics is parallel to a terrain that is already always mapped out, which means you should refuse the notion that the ballot in this round has some emancipatory value and addresses these things because voting AF reinvests power in the hands of the other, which turns the whole AF. They say Rodriguez, this is just a race war happening now card. It's not responsive. No one disagrees about the wide-ranging state-ordained violence that literally kills black and brown bodies. It's a question of what analytic we use. Both the AF and the alt give different ways to relate to one another, which means we can agree that violent power dynamics exist, and based off of those, you should relate. But it's a question of how you relate to other people around you based off those dynamics. Even then, the fact that we're not literally fighting one another, and the fact that their cards don't even pass the test of Control F race war proves that the analytic is important. Remember, Moten goes neg. Draw the line here. They can't respond to an officer because they've bastardized Moten's intent. He concludes that race war is a bad analytic because the violence of modernity occurs through the division of subjects into bounded groups, which when I see engages in, they say link turn. I'll do the coercive mimetism link here first. The discourse of race war creates a community against a visible enemy that must be fought. They have described their battle as life or death between two groups, i.e. the white and the non-white debate community. We've read hyper-specific evidence critiquing this analytic. This creates a vanguard mentality, whereas communal groups that must be controlled are constantly policed to ensure fidelity and victory. Coppell determines not only the end goals of resistance, but also the proper methods by which that resistance must take place. This is us versus them, backed up by the threats of violence. Recall the reign of terror, Lenin and Stalin. Coppell uses ballot fidelity to blackmail judges with "you are with us" or "you are against us." Think of Papa Doc in Haiti that killed tens of thousands of Haitians who weren't sufficiently committed to the cause of black nationalism and weren't sufficiently performing that loyalty. This plays out in debate, for example, with labeling black judges Uncle Toms for voting for white debaters at the NDT. Internal policing of movements causes violent purging. The spectrum used for acceptability is whether the 1AC was black enough, Latino enough, Asian enough. Remember in the 1AC Crossexamination when they said that reading framework is a subjugation of black people? Think of this creates authenticity tension against black policy debaters like Woodward last year or Drew Charter that they read T in policy arguments. According to Coppell, they have to be purged because, well, they're on the wrong side of the race war. Again, this is played out in accepted in debate through identity checking modes of surveillance on Facebook and kind of judgment over friendships from a position of mastery. The 1AC Malamud evidence calls their, quote, a performative event repeated with each reading, which proves that they kind of require a constant pledging of loyalty, a constant performance of that loyalty, much like Lenin's permanent revolution that always had more bourgeois to wipe out, which led to massive violence. The next argument was that that the white code kind of places identities. We agree, but we have impact turned the idea of accepting those identities. Yes, civil society places into identities, but the Moten evidence says allowing and accepting those identities is what the white code wants, insofar as they have labeled practices authentically white or authentically black. They say a link to the SQO, it's about your utilization. That's the Newman evidence. Even then, the all provides uniqueness. They say let anybody into the race war. This might be affectively appealing. Yeah, David Duke's a bad person, but remember, this is their author. They don't get to respond to this. They've double turned themselves, which means you should draw the line here. And it's an independent voter for intellectual irresponsibility. The fact that they can draw lines between David Duke, that's an obvious example. But our argument is about the instrumentalization of that logic and how it's played out in practice. This is all the examples I gave about revolutionary politics becoming incredibly violent as long as you accept that you're able to draw lines. They say violent practices. Look, yes, we want, like calling out violence is one thing, but the problem we have with the 1AC is ascribing certain practices as authentically white, authentically black. That is violent. It causes authenticity testing. That obviously turns the whole 1AC. The Viego evidence says that causes insecurity and racial anxiety within identities because people constantly have to perform them, which one turns to racial anxiety arguments and two turns to battle fatigue arguments because you're constantly judging people along the mirror of authenticity, which means they constantly have to reperform it. They say perm do both. That was the tag in the Moten Hardy evidence, which is obviously vague enough that we get new to in our answers if they re-explain it. It's unclear where this gets us. We are both saying that sociality is good, which means this can't be offense. It's a question of how the 1AC is antithetical to that sociality. I'll do the alt debate here. It's to unenlist from the race war and embrace the undercommons, not as a side of battle or taking sides like the 1AC did, but rather as a space of absolute unconditional vulnerability. Our strategy refuses the very terms of the race war by letting the door swing open for refuge, even if it means letting in the police, even if it means letting in the other side of the race war. This is the most radical description of white logistics possible because the alt refuses to allow the white quote to dictate our strategy. White logistics and all that shit is inevitable, but it should not dictate our politics. That's the 1AC Moten Hardy evidence. Think of George Jackson, who read Marx and Lenin and Mao in prison, and then saying how he redeemed them. He betrayed authentically black practices and was even castigated for acting like a white intellectual. Or think of the Pink Panthers, a black queer movement that sought not only to simply survive like the 1AC did, but rather to actively mobilize communities, not in reaction to whiteness, but rather as an attempt to find value within the struggle itself. Think of our strategy out of their framing of the race war, which they have zero defense of. Instead of adopting an antagonistic or oppositional relationship with white logistics, we embrace communities of care and loving one another, not for the sake of defying white logistics, but for its own sake and loving one another as being intrinsically good. In debate, this means rejecting strict lines between communities like policy v. K, white v. non-white, because the determination of those strict categories is how white logistics functions in the first place. They say the AF is a double term with framework. It was conditional. They didn't say condo bad. Even then, the idea that if we go for this K and then you just check out on framework bad is kind of the punishment of transgression that we have impact turned every single time, i.e. that the ballot can kind of remedy this punishment, i.e. that MBA has transgressed, gives Coppell the very license, the very ability to police boundaries of what is an authentic practice, which has justified the violence we say again. They say hoax argument. Look, most of these arguments were about psychoanalysis, so even all the arguments about language and linguistics does not apply. Some of our authors might think psycho is true, but most of this is just a K of their revolutionary practice, not a K of their linguistics. Hoax evidence, we're giving way more specific examples about how the way it's planned out. This hoax evidence is like two lines. Arguments that military preservation, because they've heightened the stakes to such an extent, proves that they will lead to violence inevitably. The Gillespie card, we didn't make a linguistics argument. So yes, we agree that anti-blackness is kind of bound up within the structures. It's a question of how we relate to them. They will say that race war analytic is key to mobilize energy. That's a new argument, and so is overcorrecting against bias, which I get to answer on this page if they say it. But those all link to our arguments because first, it's way worse for black and brown energy to just say there's some intractable race war and we can't do anything about it. It's way better for black energy. This is Moten talking, saying that we should just refuse those terms and disacknowledge it and unenlist from the very acceptance of those identities in the first place.
Good. Mm-hmm. Cool. What piece of 1AC evidence do you think you've recut?
I've quoted several.
No, like you've said, there was a line by line. It's like we've recut their evidence. They've reappropriated. Which part
we've recut Moten.
You've recut a different book of Moten.
What? Moten clearly goes against the F. It's maybe
right, we'll go to that Moten card that you cut. Quote the line that you've highlighted. I seek the refusal standpoint existing without standing. The first argument about visibility was that refusal is bad. You cited our Melman evidence that says that RF is refusal. Explain yourself.
No, it says seeking, and then it goes on to describe what the undercommons is. It's not in relationality.
Well, the first part is the refusal of the standpoint is good because that creates a moment of relationality. When you see cross-sex, you asked us, what side are you on?
It's at a prior level of form. So the refusal of a standpoint, i.e. the refusal of subjecthood,
the AF's refusal is not of subjecthood, but rather the refusal of the white code, which is a claim of subjecthood. Like, think of when Moten says there is no such thing as a good white person, but there's also no such thing as a good black person, because it's not about being black or white, it's about personhood itself.
That's what the AF and
No,
IC
because-
Crossix, you asked us, are people on the wrong sides? We're like,
No,
no. It's
okay,
a question of
you're gonna
practice.
go for
There's
this-
no good white person.
This
there's
is
no
K
good
is not
black
like a K of phenotypically labeling people. It's a K of ascribing values, whiteness, blackness, to practices.
But
we think that's
Moten ascribes values and
No,
says that
that's
there
not-
is
that's just not true.
whiteness, there is blackness, but it's a question of practices and those things that we should
No,
do.
well, first, the AF is certainly not that practice, because you have then drawn lines based those characteristics.
We still said, the 2AC is like, we would engage you in a militant debate. We just think it's a question of how you orient yourselves. How is that saying that we've like excluded you as an individual? We
It's not
just excluded your practice.
It's not excluding us, like MBA. It's about the way that you have drawn lines around what is the communities and how that's messed up.
Explain.
Sorry?
Explain.
So, like, all the examples I gave about what constitutes, like, your labeling framework, but, like, saying that it's a subjugation of blackness,
So, like,
right?
the example that you gave was like Malachi Robinson. We're not saying Malachi Robinson is like a bad person.
You are saying Malachi Robinson engages in white practices, right?
The
Yeah.
practice is bad. We haven't said
The
Malachi
practice is
bad.
white. I asked you what constitutes white community, and then you said these practices.
But we've said
Malachi
that
is
the
engaged in a
practices
white.
are, like the AF isn't taking a stance on individuals. We think individualizing
Oh
things
yeah.
is bad.
So first, again, like you're going to go for a lot of this re-explanation of the app. Remember, it's about the way your politics is actualized. That's one thing. Second is that it's like about when you start from that assumption that you can already denote those monikers between groups. We think that's bad.
Wait, you think the Moten evidence says that there is no differential between groups?
It at least says no. That's not the argument. It's not like there aren't black people and there aren't white people. It's
You think there aren't differences in practices?
no, they're like are bad and good practices, but labeling them authentically something or other is bad.
Okay.
I think that's pretty clear.
Like the loving one another argument. If T proves that you're not ingenuine to loving one another, why vote negative?
So again, T is a position we have taken for the block. That doesn't mean we're bound to it for the whole debate, and we've impacted on the idea that.
But
you should
like
just
your
vote for
argument is that we are genuine. Coppell is not. Their intentions are bad.
No, it's not. It's
Why
not
do
literally
you get
about
to-
you as people. It's about your strategy. It's a question of strategies. We agree.
Okay, so but your strategy was
The strategy, as of now, sure.
okay. The yeah.
Separate.
8.
anyone not good?
There's no cards. Right?
Good.
Debate is a unique activity where there are two sides. One must always negate the other. Their interpretation only counts for the affirmative subject matter and ignores competitive drives and the necessity of negation. Decisions in debate are shaped by what increases the odds of winning. This means good interpretation must channel combination into tactical and substantive incentives and make debate rounds good overall. You should encourage clear link around stable competition and predictable literature. Their interpretation ignores these and artificially limits the role of the negative. They conflate engagement with negation by understanding clash as agree with us and discuss rather than refutation, which should be a global framing issue on all of their dissads. The only negation access is clash and intrinsic benefits come through the cross refutation because it operationalizes critical thinking, self-reflexivity, and argumentative refinement, forcing debaters to be responsible for second and third order defenses makes better researchers and advocates with more informed conclusions. Good rounds require depth and are determined by quality neg research. You should overcorrect to solve neg ground, which outweighs because debate only starts when we read the 1 and C. Clash turns case advocates must account for competing perspectives, which requires being accountable for defending change. Good negation is a prayer to avoid false positives, which answers the built-in skills offense. Most the framing issue here is most of the 2AC on this was blippy and was like 2 seconds long. The 2NR gets new explanation when the 1AR inevitably gives new warrants and extrapolation. They say no. They say the race war should frame it. These claims are not radical, but a product of marginalization. One has to intensify their vigilance and purification rather than do something that's more strategically effective. This shoehorn analysis into prescriptive narratives of how the world works, which has pernicious effect of creating more insular critique to detach from the actual world. When posturing is the goal instead of analysis, the meaning of mundane actions is wildly inflated. Causalities lazily analogized. The meaning is not bound by inconvenient things like the facts of the external world or the perception and objective of others. You should radically discount the accuracy of their truth claims and for the ability for them to solve anything. That's the read card. This is obviously true in the context of framing racism and the struggle as a literal war, which is a rhetorical gesture instead of a description of empirical empathy. Reality, even if they were right about the description, picking a side does not mean you improve the odds of winning a war. War requires resources, strategy, and tactics. The one he doesn't produce that, but the long-term process of clash does. Our Zach Evans is a better description of how racism operates through inter-troop conversion, which is a dropped argument. They say forms content. The resolution is not over-prescribed form. Non-traditional approaches to reading a plan can't undermine logistics just as much, and logistical argument links to them. Now, Crossex is overcoded. Their stuff's overcoded too by the fact that they have some sort of end goal. If they don't read, if it's true that they don't have an end goal, and reading a plan necessarily does, then that binary makes no sense as arbitrary because you can obviously have a political organization priority and still leave open into the final process. The counter-interpretation debate. Our interpretation involves clash. Ask only one or so far because we're guaranteed links to government action and topicality chance. Virtually no question. Stop debate from performatively via solvency. Their interpretation wrecks that. It takes the T down negation. Substantively, smart teams make the smallest claims to force neg generics that neg loses CP specific case versus and competition scenarios. Tactically, they incentivize as many new modular apps as possible to avoid even the best neg prep. Their model makes the neg win a completely accurate characterization of the 1AC, and then lose to no link perm. 2AR's militant strategy just means having a course of action that you are combative or aggressive about, which could be anything since the question of your attitude, queer militancy, Filipino militancy, black militancy, etc. All those things infinitely multiply, no limits or stasis, and no guarantee of anything from the neg. To say the militant skills offense, but the resolution does not prevent militant skills. We're impact turning this, and we're link turning this insofar as we think clash is the best way to test militant strategies and to actually build those skills. Reading a 1AC and not giving the negative ability to engage doesn't make skills effective. It just means that you're locked into the same thing over and over again, which means you can't fight the race war. They say the fiat argument that's not neutral. This requires them to win race war framing, which we impact turn. We didn't say you have to fiat anything. If you want to lose and roll back, you're welcome to. But fiat promotes clash can be restrained by procedural objections. Fiat is not arbitrary. Its specific purpose is to move discussion from would to should, which is the way that all of our education should operate. They say the pacification DA. This was mainly answered above. The resolution does not presuppose form, which means you can imagine new futures under it, and it doesn't mean it doesn't exclude any of their stuff. But switch side debate solves this because you can read it on the neg every round. Debate over the course of the year solves their impacts. If they're right, and our discussions and we do limit their stuff out and pacify them, the neg will win every debate, and then we'll eventually after going 3 every term, we'll learn about it and overcorrect the individuation DA. We're not submitting to anything. It's a demand. The client can be a demand the state to stop doing something bad, and we've critiqued the binary between inside and outside. The things outside come into inside, and which is the reason that clash is key to make those skills effective. They say the TVA offense is to reduce all arms skills as a method of fighting the race war. Arms skills themselves are critical to the United States global colonial network. It solves the social energies arguments because the state's inevitably an enemy. If we don't talk about, we will lose the race war. Making militant demands is one form of coping mechanism for black and brown students to debate militant strategies, and they say that arms skills are logistics of control, which is a reason that this solves any arguments why the TVA doesn't solve this neg ground that proves that our clash events are true. They say stasis points bad. They didn't read the card. It was just an unwarranted assertion because they read the tagline, but losing stasis links to all our offense because there's literally no way for the negative to engage. That was above. They say the Warren card, we didn't make a fairness impact, so this isn't an impact turn, but voting on Warren eviscerates rack potential debate because the the judge will always vote for the less privileged team. This is advanced research. And 2, the idea that losing around it can allow us to understand what lucky black is reductionist and trivializing. They say, well, fairness to the value is good. If from that standpoint they conclude racism is bad, and they structure their arguments by relying you to fairly adjudicate the game in the first norms. They say idea testing bad. That was above. What's the alternative? A total lack of education. And they also presuppose logistics. They say spill up. When does that happen? That was above. They link the echo chamber stuff was above. We're not policing. Doesn't presuppose what you can say or say you should lead debate. All the reasonability stuff. The sum of all the interpretation is an unreasonable topic, and we've won a large risk of offense. And the fiat was above.
I had 5 credits.
You have 5 what?
That might be wrong.
Yeah, we have 503.
Oh, okay.
Same.
Yeah, I got that. Don't worry. There's one card. I'll send it out.
Yeah, sorry, did you take that took 2 seconds.
I sent it out. Okay, the order is going to be case, K, T. Actually, do case TK.
me 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Where's my water bottle?
Everyone good? Vote affirmative for military preservation similar to the Holder body system, which abstracts the code of logistics and turns inward toward an indebted, incomplete field, creating neural blockage that halts violent individuation, which saps social energy needed for black and brown students to enjoy the waste for the simulant evidence. To examples of extrajudicial killing, self-right, and policing committed proves the race from which you have a catechetical comparative to abolish the white debate community. That's a hardy evidence they've considered our 3 of logistics, which I'm not going to necessarily extend, but you should keep it into mind when I get later on to the case. We'll go to T now. Debate is a microcosm of the race which is that you should put procedurals on hold because the sole question of this debate is which how should we enjoy the race where the insist on debatability outweighs everything else proves their argument because it prioritizes proceduralism over the individuals. This is like the indites of raciality prove the double turn because they have presented the theory of racism based on in-group, out-group bias and the one which recreates the boundaries that they've created, which is a double turn with the criticism and proves that they don't get linked because all their links are to form and they've double turned themselves. Logistics proves that form is content because it's infiltrated in the cognitive linguistic protocols of the internal maybe should there's a neurological rewriting. They have not answered the bell evidence, which means that they don't get any kind of new answers because their argument is that privileged debaters will that doesn't make any sense because A still neurologically rewires and this is proven by the Solomon evidence. Their interforces rewiring but the political the impact is cruel and causes psychological violence. Counter absence defending militant reading of the resolution and forces affirmatives to defend militant strategies like the BVP versus Apothesis and strategy which prove the counter was able to endure the A violence that we've described. The Shikaitis evidence proves that they get ground roof examples that is limited because you choose one strategy and refine it, which means that it's not necessarily a sense if you only choose a strategy but in multiple strategies you can choose different ones proves that it's limited. And third is that they've conceded that militant debate is predictable debate and TVS which forces militancy to adhere to terms of debate. The impact is pacification which drains social energy to endure the race. So this is proven by how they find predictability and extra resolution practices like fiat means that they pick and choose arbitrary norms to enforce the individuation that is not handled correctly. The binary is not international and domestic, but it's most definitely linked to us because it's a question of in debate versus out of debate. They have this. It's a question of in debate versus out of debate. The most definitely links to them because their former topical debate is still a will to USFG should process our political projects as complete, which allows logistics to infiltrate and individuate our affect, which is a coercive power in debate. Forces us to sharpen the presumption of violence out there, which distances us from violence in here and proliferates anti-black violence. Fairness, you should refuse their contracted fairness valid arguments because it compromises social energy for fairness, even if they haven't gone for it. Their notion of proceduralism is weaponized in debate. The idea testing arguments they have conceded the Hawthorne evidence, which is amazing and applies to debate. We'll give examples. Their debate for clashes of former liberal multiculturalism, their vision of TVs, which have debate is essentially add black participants and start with meaningful dialogue is always ties. They're proven by when teams like Westwood BSB, the TVA policy teams like Whitney and go for a process counterplan where there's form of racial terror that's recreated. Their exclusion arguments are largely non-responsive because our argument is that even when scholarship is led in genuine engagement never happens, which is also an impact turn to the alternative that they've gone for because it proves that they're not able to create those certain strategies because the race war gets replicated within the alternative TV. The only example they've given is not competitive. Proves that there's a paradigmatic imperative to only talk about the race war, even if it's possible to talk about the race war in your model. That's 1% of our lives which can't resolve our offenses, which side they have conceded the Muhammad evidence, which is that we need apositional politics, not oppositional. Just saying that there's a race war does not mean that we're necessarily oppositional, but says that we need to endure in the face of the race war is the kind of apositionality that we've described in ways that suicide can, most definitely can resolve this. The critique. We have made a descriptive claim about the race war that is happening now, not that no one can join in common struggles. We have just said that once we are the uncommons, we should take a stand on certain practices, which is no links to a lot of their offense. You think that their main argument is that we are the us versus them binary, but you think we're a double turn. The one that literally starts with debate, but it literally starts with the notion of debate, starts with two sides and goes on to have their own racial theory, which proves that they are just as reactionary as the affirmative, and the only link differential is a question of form, because Aiden said the alternative is the same thing as the affirmative, just different in the level of form, means that they've linked into it just as much, and all their links are non-unique, means that you should vote affirmative on the paper. You should remember quotes from the one he sees, not pick a side, that's the GDS affirmative, but you can separate people from strategies. We should still love everyone, but once you're letting, it should be a question of deciding those strategies. Yes, when there is a race war in the face of it, we're not going to attack it, but rather endure it, because it's a question of being indebted to one another, which is what the permutation do. Both says the Moon and Hardy evidence, we should remember to be in debt to one another, because identities are not complete, but rather always incompleting one another, which is the whole point of the argument. They have conceded the Hooks evidence is not just an indebted psychoanalysis, but it link turns their argument, it link turns their ressentiment impact turn, it link turns the ressentiment impact to all the links that they go for, because this is the Milton preservation is able to overcome the wounded attachments, the Herm debate proper, the method debates are terrible, method debates, yes, we get a permutations, or also just plan debates, which is completely terrible, which means that we influence the education of political ecological arguments is not reactionary, because we said apositionality, not oppositionality. We still allow people to test strategies. The first link about reactive racialization, they are also reactive racialization. They have their own theory of power about in-group, out-group buyer, and also they live in the race which lets everyone. It's not reactive, but it's a question of in the face of this, what do we do? I've already said the apositionality arguments and proves that we don't classify structures, but are rather key to indebtedness. Saying that there's a race war and violent practices is not descriptive of who's within the undercommon. We've made a prescription saying that the race war is good, saying that there is a race war is good because it creates an incentive and creates an urgent need for militancy here and now, which is something that they can actualize. Arguments that would have voting opposite reinvestment in power. Another argument side proves that there's a sociality energy that goes with the millennials. Neg arguments no. He said it's a question. It's not. He said it's not a side of institution, which proves that it's a double term with T. The coercive pneumaticism arguments no. It's a question of being indebted to one another because identities are always incomplete. We determine proper existence. No, we don't think this is how you should fight the racial dividers. So we should open spaces for being indebted to one another. The authenticity testing. Woodward and more arguments. No, it's that's a status quo because a consider theory of logistics that be how authenticity testing is always happening. But you name dropping specific black communities in this proves that you weaponize black experience against people, which turns all the impacts that you got for the intellectual response and voter argument. No, it doesn't make any sense. And the arguments by the alternative, no, only the affirmative is able to trace the code because you have not performatively done the same thing that the one and see you have just picked out of certain, you just picked out of the race war, which we have impacted because the race war is the only way to mobilize kind of social energy, and only if the affirmative is able to trace code and create social energy to endure the race war.
638.
Okay.
I have no idea. Well, judges, I think that every judge who shows up gets to judge. Finals. Like, usually, I don't think every coach shows up. So, like, for example, the coaches of all of the teams in the seasons are usually around. Obviously, the teams that win, the coaches don't judge, but like, Woodward and Western stays, and like, Liverpool, I know it's
Is everybody good for everyone? It's KT.
KT.
Yeah. Is anybody not ready? Sounds good. Purging is an external impact with no impact defense to their former community formation, and we're winning that all of their impact turns to a solve the alternative because they only have a 5-second defense of the race war in the 1 hour. It's about the way the politics is played out. Enforcing boundaries justifies mass violence like pop adaptation, revolution, or Mao's purging, none of which are answered. And we're examples in the Twin Sea, like the 1AC, that were both built on ideas of some perfect community that is always at hand but never quite present. Both of these are, this is both a form of psychological violence, but also of literal violence about the way that they justify violence when they're harnessing evidence, quote, advocates of revolutionary violence, which also causes psychological anxiety, which would be in the limelight. The limelight. They first say that they're descriptive of race war, but not who should join it. First is that at the very least we have an impact on their analytic of a race war. Even if Coppell themselves are not saying who's on what side, we're saying that using the race war as an analytic to understand race relations is bad at the very least. And the alt avoids an offense. The Newman evidence says that it results in the consolidation of homogeneous communities against us or them, and race as a stakes for life or death, which means anything that is justified under necessary, and kind of homogenizes community insofar as people are labeled on one side and then violence is taken out against them. The second internal link is that the fact that they have said we should abolish the white community is a value judgment on certain practices that label them authentically white or authentically black, i.e. a reading framework is authentically white or black, which demarcates between those communities in the first place. Their invocation of that analytic is what justifies the violence that we're given by all of those examples, even if they themselves do not prescribe who should. The fact that they've said there's a race war necessitates that prescription because there are two sides. We have said there aren't two sides. It's much more complex, but that analytic is bad. They've conceded this turns the only impact the 1 hour extends for why race war is good, which is social energy, but they've conceded that having to constantly perform to what is authentically white or what authentically black drains social energy and requires necessitates the constant re-performance and a rubric of authenticity, which is what labels violence. They drop the examples in debate, i.e. judgment over friendship surveillance on Facebook, or calling black judges Uncle Toms. They say one in ours framework. The Twin Sea preempted this framework argument, which would be answered on another flow, but it links to all of our offense. They say we don't pick a side. This is not responsive. They said the white debate community should be abolished. The fact that they have kind of made a value judgment on a community that they think is homogenous belies the complexity of that community and justifies violence against them insofar as they have painted this as such a high stakes battle. We've impact turned the idea that you should purely endure. I extended the curse of mimeticism stuff above. I'm going to extend the reactivity stuff here, but it's not often just a case solvency argument. The fact that we should simply endure in the face of violence cedes the code to white logistics because it accepts some form of inevitability, which calcifies the structure, which is a solvency claim not answering the 1 hour insofar as they've related their politics to the coordinates of whites, to the white logistics, which means their capacity to move beyond that is constrained and limited. And instead, it is far more radical to say that shit's inevitable, but we should not even talk about it. We should not even relate ourselves to it, which means when the 2 AR gets up and is super ethos and pathos, you shouldn't kind of prescribe that because it organizes our politics around whiteness. They say hoax. The only one analysis was that we overcome wound attachments. That is not sufficient to beat this. When we did a lot of specific link works and analysis, the perm, their only answer for why they get the perm is, quote, plan debates are terrible. That's not responsive. First is that they've conceded their severance because we have incompatible views of racialization. Second is that I did like 30 seconds here in the Twin Sea that was not responsive. They have said throughout the debate this is a question of competing models, competing advocacies. Perms belie that education because it, one, shows that we can always compromise. Two, it's even worse, and without reading a topical action because it means they can always re-clarify, which stops a true comparison of strategies, which they have said are the purpose of this. They made another framework argument that was above. They say saying race war good creates social energy. One, it is way worse for social energy to say that there is some intractable race war and then accepting that is the death knell of social energy is much more productive for black and brown debaters, as Moten says, to kind of split from that and not acknowledge it at first and to unenlist from the race war. I'll do the alt debate here. I don't think there's an alt fails argument in the 1 hour. It's not really answers. You should accept unconditional vulnerability by unenlisting them the race war. That is far more radical than the AF and defies white logistics because it presumes the ability of white logistics to code our politics is something that shouldn't occur in the first place, which means that we're not simply enduring but rather loving for each other's sake, which means we don't conceptualize our politics vis-a-vis white logistics. They dropped the George Jackson example about redeeming authentically black scholarship and then orienting yourself for the Pink Panthers example that was not simply enduring but rather loving for loving sake instead of coalescing it vis-a-vis white politics. They say on the open spaces the invocation of race war necessitates and justifies line drawing that was above. They say we weaponize black experiences, so it's like 5 seconds. It's not weaponization, rather an illustrative example that we have used. You have weaponized black suffering insofar as you've said this is a reason to vote for us. Framework. We're no longer forwarding this as an offensive claim where the 1 hour didn't make any strategic double turns from the concession, which they should have done, or because it's not predictable. The idea that ballots can kind of reverse neurological rewiring is an incredibly naive form of politics that allows black and brown judges to assuage their guilt and then vote for certain teams without doing anything out of round or actually advocating authentically for the undercommons, which was said in the 2NC. It's an independent link because the idea that Coppell gets to kind of negotiate what is a proper strategy formation, i.e. there are lots of people who think framework is a genuine disagreement with the 1AC, but kind of that punitive measurement, i.e. you should vote go AF because an MBA transgressed a line. That is the line drawing that we have impact turn every single time. It is meaningful dialogue because we're no longer forwarding this claim. The idea that we have to be kind of beholden to every single thing we say in the 1NC belies strategy formation and kind of locks us into dogma, which they have said throughout the debate is bad. Impact turn enduring in front of the race war above, that's kind of an inherently conservative strategy because it calcifies those structures. If they go for the white logistics stuff on case, we agree white logistics is a thing, but we shouldn't coordinate our politics along the grid of intelligibility or white logistics.
323.
It'll be T or case K T. Case T. Case T. Does anybody know? The two in our concedes the race war is real. This is only a question of the tactics that we need to infiltrate in order to solve the majority of their offense. The alternative is just that we shouldn't conceptualize the race war and remove it off the grid, which means that the theory of power solves it because they've conceded the solvency mechanism of the AF. White logistics as controls our relations which sustains the process of individuation. You should adopt military preservation of being together in racial terror. You should remember quotes from the 2NC when Meacham tries to get at what is the telos of the affirmative? What do you do? Why do you do it? The response is just that we love each other for no reason. It just creates energy. There's no particular reason or particular end goal. Proves that we're in forever servitude towards each other. There's no end goal of that, which is what the Modernity evidence prescribes and says that we should let everyone into the undercommon. We have said that yes, you should let everyone into the undercommon, but once you are there, you should have prescriptive claims that guide our politics. Saying that the race war is real and happening now is good. They've conceded the one-era warrant that not that it creates social energy, but it creates a sense of urgency. It creates a sense of need to fight it. It creates a sense of need for endurance in the status quo. They're saying that we should just love people for the sake of loving people is the process of individuation because there's no need to do so in the first place. It proves that the alternative doesn't solve, which was a one-era argument that goes dropped in the turnout. Go to the Hook's evidence is a massive link to their understanding of lashing out because of racialization is reliant on a psychoanalytic theory that we have indicted the level of absolvency because military preservation is able to overcome the wounded attachments. They have conceded that two identities because it means that we are socially incomplete as how we cope with what logistics does. The impact is responsible that aiding goes for are just solved by this because of what loving each other can make. We're indebted to each other. This means that military preservation is able to bridge the divide that logistics seeks to divide via the creation of identities. Concession of logistics is important because it proves a net benefit to our analytic of the race war. The refusal to trace white logistics means that they can never create, which breaks it down. White logistics necessitates this assistance. That it's via a form of communicative and racial violence, which means that even if they agree with the theory, the inability to read it via the race war creates a misunderstanding of how race operates because we said that tracing is key to social energy. The K is absolutely terrible and only competes with the 1AC at the level of form. That means uniqueness is generated off the process of reading, which has a couple implications. You should ask yourself, does the alternative agree with military preservation? Otherwise, it's a critique of form and they've lost. One is they've engaged in a process of reactive racialization, i.e. they have said the racial should be theorized as an in-group, out-group, and that it can be changed on the social, which means it links to all their arguments about trying identities to certain groups. The argument on the T-flow that this is a punishment, it's not a punishment. It means your alternative just doesn't solve because the alternative is a performative event. Think of it this way. Performative contradictions are a justification for severance, even if conditional, which proves we get a permutation. This could be the question of our method, not our analytic. Even if they say race war is a link, if sociality as incompleteness of our identity and understanding solved, you should vote affirmative. Second, it proves that they can't solve the affirmative because every reading is a rupture that revitalizes sociality, which proves it's a performative event, not just one that you implicate. The line by line proper, they say purging is net benefit. They've conceded that if it's a theory of logistics, purging is the status quo. The reason that identities get purged is because they are individuated by the process of logistics that says every individual is different. We have not prescribed people, we have prescribed practices, i.e. Aiden might be a great person, he might want to engage in militant debates, but we think his practice is bad, which means that we haven't said that you are on the wrong side of the race war or that you should pick sides. We let everyone and we love everyone. We're in debt to everyone, but questioning those practices once you're in the undercommons is important because it creates resistance strategies as per the Shakaitis and Graeber evidence. They say it's psychological and literal violence. They've conceded that the process of logistics is what creates a psychological and literal violence. We are the same love as the alternative. You should read it this way, which means we solve that violence as much as the alternative does. They say the Newman evidence says us or them and labeled on one side. You should remember that we are not Georgetown Day. We do not say pick a side. We have not said that there are certain practices that are, we've said that there are certain practices on each side, which proves that these sort of pick a side, it's us or them, and labels these two individuals as bad. They say practice or white. We still think you can separate practices from people. That was above. They say there's more than two sides in complex, but they've conceded our theory of race, which means that it's whiteness versus the world. There's an explicit concession by the tuner later, which proves that our performance solves, and their performance of a percon doesn't. The authenticity testing of like the theory is to the status quo. It drains energy now, which proves that there's only a risk of absolvency. Say the white community, they pose it at such high stakes. We've impact turned instead that posing it at high stakes creates the urgency for the need of endurance strategies. Now they say endurance is bad because it seeds the code, the coordinates of logistics, but simply describing activity and saying that we should know that it's there does not seed the code. Again, we are not reactive. We haven't said that we should engage the race war, say that we should fight it, say we should do something about it, create movements, but we've said that we should relate to each other, we should love each other in the face of the race war, which is important because the reason that we love each other is the race war, which means they have the alternative can't solve or the permutation does. They say permutation is severance. What the hell do we sever out of? He says that we have different theories of race, but goes on to say that logistics is real, which means we don't sever if it's a question of models and attitudes. It's about finding the best model.
Cool. Are we all here? Congratulations to everyone for making it to the semifinals of the Barkley Forum. The decision on a very close 2-1 was for the negative from MBA.
I sat, so I had I was conflicted about a couple issues. One about the permutation. I'm conflicted because I do think the negative spends more time saying why they can't have one, but yet I also think the 1AC has a lot of reasons why it is probably true the incompleteness of the project and constant planning would necessitate a combination, and that the 1AC as a project is a work without beginning, end, and constant planning as opposed to policy is something we should take with us wherever we go, which would mean it's always changing, and it's in that incompleteness of a project that would lead to bring people together. And so that sort of militancy, I think, is a radical refusal in a lot of ways, and the social insurgency among people who refuse to be passive victims or willing participants in. So I think it is very compatible, but I'm also conflicted because, yes, in like a technical debate sense, you are saying they shouldn't get one. So then the other thing that kind of trips me up is I can see reasons why calling it a race war might homogenize white communities and create an enemy in us or them, why it might be good to frame it that way because people consider how to endure in trying times. I just think if we take away that framing and like took out all the places the 1AC says race war, it's really hard to understand and trace why xenophobia and hate occur and how the logistics become the problems that take hold. So if both teams agree that logistics and coordinates exist and they are white, then I think they have a better argument for why we should trace those rather than refuse them. And we can't move beyond the logistics or understand why they work or create new codes without understanding it that way. And if we took away the phrasing of race war, the 1AC basically makes no sense. But I'm also conflicted because there's not a zero risk of some of the dissents you're going for framing it this way. Like, yes, it may lead to purging, and abolishing the white community is a value judgment that would demarcate and force people to conform or not. And purging will happen when people are perceived as not loyal to enduring or ending or fighting whatever the race war. I just think they're winning an argument that those things are already happening now and that it's better to understand it this way to trace why the violence, racism, xenophobia, hate occur and endure rather than leave. But I'll let the other judges talk.
So I voted negative. I think the alternative agrees with most of the affirmatives to accept its understandings, except for that of the race war, because the idea of the race war generates purging through requirements of authenticity. This is the reason that the 1AC labels practices or white or black, which inevitably lets vanguards say that someone is not black enough, which they have a lot of impacts to. I think that Becca's argument about tracing is what I'm missing, the explanation that ties that to the alternative and says that this is a reason the alternative is insufficient to solve the logistics arguments or to solve the moments of love that we need. Because without that solvency deficit, I just don't really understand why the alt doesn't solve large portions of the 1AC. And I think while in the 2AR and the 1AR, your basic framing is this generates urgency. I don't really understand what I'm doing with urgency.
but I think that it is precisely the urgency leads to the slippage between here is an action and here is the actor, and makes the forms of forced authenticity and vanguardism more likely. So that idea of the constant revolution is actually encouraged by your constant call to immediacy, sans here is the reason that we need to generate that urgency or something else, which largely means that there is a disadd to the permutation or a reason that I shouldn't include it. I think the permutation is clearly severance if I conclude that link argument, and if you want to go for these severance good arguments, they need to be earlier in the debate, and I think you would be better off as actually tying them to some of these 1AC shouldn't be static arguments that exist about the undercommons and groundlessness. This hooks thing, I'm not going to lie, I don't really follow what's happening here. I don't understand what it has to do with decay. It might be an add-on that says violence is good and we should have some purging in order to satiate the ego, but if that is the case, you need to impact to it and compare it to violence toward those within the community. Outside of that, I don't really know what to do. The last thing I'll say is there were a few times when you're both like, Moten concludes our way, no our way, no our way. Like, these cards are not particularly self-explanatory for someone who doesn't read them a lot. They're almost unflowable in general because of the way that they're written. Is like, they're full of play on words, they're full of other things, they have a lot of rhetorical questions. And if I'm just like, I'm going to call for these, I'll read them and decide who's right, it's like, I don't know, there are chapters that are based on like poetics and wordplay, not like, here's a decisive argument. Which makes it much more difficult, and I would just always be a little worried about leaving that in the hands of the judge. I have a lot more comments, but I figure you all want to prep and we can talk about this after.
Yeah, I agree with most everything. I think this debate sort of came down to, at least for me, is that using the term race war good or bad, and both teams are kind of explaining to me that excluding people is bad. And so I would also then ask myself, like, does using the term race war exclude people? Like, the negative is telling me it does. And I think that it does. I think the negative is ahead on these. I think your 1AC is set up to say that, like, we need to combat these like white institutions, these white practices, which you have kind of labeled, which you have given examples of. And I think I buy the negative spin that this inherently means that there are certain people whose their commitment to the cause is going to come into question. They'll be labeled as like being too white, and they're getting some game on these dissads. And I think most of what you all do is say like, no, we don't label, which I think you guys need just a kind of a better response than like your argument is that we label practices, not people. And I think you guys need a little bit of a better response to like those practices get ascribed onto those people. And so I think that if I give you guys a perm, I think that that's sort of a dissad to the perm. Yeah, and I think that, and I also think your biggest argument on like why the race war framing is good, similarly, is that urgency question, but I don't know what to do with it, right? Especially because you're not making claims that like the alternative isn't going to be able to resolve this, right? You're claiming like, oh, it makes it urgent, but you're not saying that theirs isn't urgent, so I don't really know what to do with like you all solving this faster than they do. And I similarly think you guys are potentially a little behind on the like, do you even get a perm debate? So I'm not sure if I should even grant you the perm, just because I think they're sort of just out-teching you there. That's kind of the quick and dirty of my decision, but also willing to answer questions.
I have a couple questions, but if y'all want to just go.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Alright, cool. The 1AR, just like arguments that I need to explain better or just like frame, because like I didn't like was kind of confused just like what to do with this 1AR.
Okay, so I think one thing that is taking up time in a way that I find very ineffective is time on the case. It's not explained in terms of either to or to all. So I think that you actually want to move all of that onto the alternative, because the only question of the case is how is it different than the all, if that makes sense. And I think that that is a way that you need to generate it. And one thing that strategically seems difficult about the affirmative position at the end of the debate is you're going for our thing is the same as their thing, largely, right? But that the more you say we're the same, the more you don't have a point of generating difference. And you need difference to have offense. So I think that you want to reframe it in, we are different because blank. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it doesn't have to be like, here's everywhere we're different, or we can't have any no-link arguments, but like, you gotta choose one thing that is a point of clash. The other thing I'll say is, I think that there were some portions of the 1NR and T that were like a little messier, and I think that as such you extended like 2 or 3 things that you're like, these are conceded, these are offense, they outweigh, next. But if you're gonna do that, if you think it's like, this thing is conceded and we can win on it, then you don't need as many of them.
Right.
Does that make sense? So like, that can let you reallocate some time around.
Right.
Another big, it sounds like endurance is just like more time on this permutation and why you get to have one. Because even I am like, I think they're winning that you don't get one, and I end up voting on like a separate issue that endurance is better than leaving it be. But I think had the permutation been more viable as the 2AR, and you like have more of a reason why you get one, then it could be a really different debate.
Are there benefits to using the phrase race war that aren't extracted in rebuttals that we could do a better job of? Are there benefits to the phraseology that when I see are using race war that we're not extracting in rebuttals that you think that we could go back to?
I'd have to check the one I see for that, because I know that you all talk about like the reason why like calling this a race war is important. They're just not really in the last speech. In the last speech, it's really only just like it's this call to urgency, and I think better explaining like what that call to urgency means and like why it doesn't exist now, or they can't generate it, and any of the other benefits that like the one you see outlines, because they're there, they're just not brought there.
For me, part of what's missing is I don't understand the solvency mechanism of the affirmative outside of we need to generate love for love's purpose, or like this mutual indebtedness. And that thing clearly is not tied to the concept of labeling something a race war. So it's an awkward place where you're like, we need the race war because it generates urgency. But I don't know what urgency has to do with that solvency and impact mechanism that you're going for, if that makes sense. So it's very easy for them to be like, well, we can just do that other thing without urgency, and you obviously don't have an argument that mends the two pieces together, if that makes sense. So I need something that's like, we need urgency because it is the only way to motivate people to do this, and they can't just fiat love for love's sake. They have to generate a way of getting people to that political position, which is what we are debating. Because like they kind of get away with a few times just being like, well, we just like agree with the rest of the 1AC. And what that means, kind of, I think part of this is we might also have different interpretation of what that means. Like for me, I'm happy to say that means they get to imagine a world where we have love for love's sake, and you have to have one where there's love for love's sake, and we need this metaphor of war. And then, like, if that's the case, those things are obviously being delinked from each other. Does that make sense? So you need to link them together and describe what you think the bounds of what they get to imagine is, and how to implicate these things, and like maybe this rhetorical strategy is necessary for convincing people to get to that space, or whatever. Does that make some sense to you? Cool.
I think you'll sort of get there a little bit. It's not really extrapolating. You talk about the fact that like you need this explanation of the race war as sort of like a starting point for any kind of discussion about it. That's sort of there, but it's a little blippy for me. And so I think if that's better fleshed out, then that might also resolve sort of Klarman's problem about like why these two things need to be together.
One like kind of random thing I will say, it does seem much more intuitive to me to go for the argument that's like, if we just say anyone can come in and we can never ascribe attributes to a person, only actions that they've done, can we like not say Nazis were Nazis? Like that, I understand that's not exactly what your evidence set says, but it seems way more intuitive. And I don't know. It seems like the thing that like their answer is just like, yeah, your card doesn't say that, which to me is a signal that they don't actually have a good answer to that. But maybe not. I don't know.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Do you all have any further?
I think we're gonna. Is it cool if we email y'all? Thank you so much for doing it.